The QIDI Q2 claims to be the only 3D printer you'll ever need. Easy enough to use for beginners, yet capable of handling advanced materials as you grow. But does it really live up to that promise? Today, we put it to the test. First thing is to get this printer out of the box. This machine was very kindly sent over by QIDI for me to test out early, but you know how we run things on this channel. I always just want to give you a realistic look at what these machines are capable of creating. As I work on getting it out of the box, let's quickly run through the key specs and features so you know what kind of machine we'll be working with today. The QIDI Q2 is an enclosed Core XY style 3D printer with a build volume of 270 by 270 by 256 millimeters. Its bimetal nozzle can reach up to 370 degrees Celsius, while the heated bed goes up to 120 degrees Celsius. It also features active chamber heating and a 3-in-1 air filtration system that's MET certified, making it the first 3D printer to achieve that certification. You can also pair it with the QIDI box to create multicolor or multi-material prints. But now back to the unboxing of this machine. The next step I had to take was physically trying to maneuver this entire printer out of the box. I did appreciate that the sticker on the top of this packaging actually displayed the weight. Printers never want to come out of the box easily for me when I'm filming, but after struggling for a bit, I did eventually manage to maneuver it onto my desk. Underneath all of that, you have a couple more toolboxes packaged, one that has the power cord, spool holder, some tools, and the other one has even more tools and also an Ethernet cable. But now back to working on the printer. First was removing the plastic bag that was enveloping the entire machine, then removing the plastic wrap that's helping to keep the door shut during transit. Then looking from the top down, there's even more packaging to remove from the inside of the printer, various zip ties and foam padding to help keep the gantry in place during transit. So remove all of that as well as the cardboard that's surrounding the hot end. You have a couple of pieces of tape to remove around the hot end cover, and then you can go ahead and install the PTFE tube. Now taking a look on the inside of the printer, first thing is the build plate is enclosed in a plastic bag, so you'll need to remove that. But I personally like leaving the build plate off of the machine for now while I work on removing the 4 screws that are keeping the bed in place. They're really well labeled, so you shouldn't have any difficulty locating them. Next is on to installing the touchscreen. First is removing the piece of tape that's keeping the screen cable in place. From looking at the side of the screen, you want the USB port to be on the right-hand side as well as the hooks to be pointing downwards. Then it's just plugging in the LCD cable and then slotting those hooks into the slots on the machine. It's kind of like a square keyhole, so you slide it downwards and then over to lock it in place. Next is adding the glass panel. This just sits on the top of the machine, but first you'll want to remove the packaging from both sides. This glass has a pretty unique feature in that it's designed to be able to be slid back when ventilation is needed and not entirely removed like most other machines. It also has these tabs that will hold or lock it in place. And the final step is plugging the power cord into the back of the printer. While looking at the back of the machine, typically you would also be looking at adding the external spool holder to this back attachment, but I'm going to be using the QIDI box instead. So I got it out of the box, got the foam removed, got it out of the plastic bag, and then all of the instructions and accessories are packaged within the actual QIDI box. First up is this box that's kind of confusingly labeled because yes, the QIDI box is compatible with the Plus4, but within this is the actual hub that you will need to be installing on this machine. There are some parts tucked within the side foam packaging, so make sure you don't accidentally miss those. In one of the instruction manuals, you can see the differences for how the box attaches to the Plus4 versus the Q2, and it's that one piece that's the most different, which is this hub part that you need to remove the actual hub piece from this larger mount to then attach to the back of the Q2. And this gets attached using those same 4 bolts. Then you can connect the PTFE tube that's already attached to the printer to the right side of the hub. The QIDI box comes with a plethora of PTFE tubes packaged within it. Most of these are going to be extra, but we're going to be using these 5 really long ones that we will only be needing 4 of to connect from the QIDI box to the hub. From there, it technically doesn't matter which of the 4 slots these tubes attach to for the hub. I was trying to go with some semblance of organization for them though. And then you have these 2 connector cables to attach. Both of these cables have pretty unique end connection points, so you don't have to worry too much about accidentally plugging them in wrong. The cable with the white end goes from the hub to the box, and then the other cable goes from the box to the bottom of the printer. Then all that's left to connect is the power cable to the back of the QIDI box. And now we can power this printer and the QIDI box on and start getting this machine set up. The first menu you're prompted with is language selection, and then the printer will run you through the disassembly process that we already have done with removing all of the various bolts and other packaging. Once you've confirmed your way through a few screens, it will decide to move the bed upwards for you to be able to remove the final pieces of packaging within the printer. Once you've confirmed you've unlocked and removed all of the packaging you need to, the printer will start some basic self-performance tests just to make sure that everything is working as it should. Once it's run through all of its checks and found no abnormalities, it will then begin the auto bed leveling process. After it's completed that, the next step it will take is input shaping, which is where it looks like it's doing nothing, but it sounds like this. Once it's completed that, you can start to use your printer. First, I would recommend checking for new firmware updates, but after that, you should be good to go. I decided to jump straight in with a multicolor print. I first loaded my filament into the QIDI box and then went into the box settings to assign the correct type and color of filament to those slots. This just makes it easier if you go to sync the box information in the slicer to automatically map the filament, or when you go to press print on the machine, it will automatically do it as well. I've been really needing a storage box for some of my patches, so this case with a multicolor Star Wars lid is going to be perfect. These flat designs are also my favorite kind of multicolor print because they always look really impressive, but don't involve a lot of wasted filament due to the color changes only being a couple of layers. The lid turned out phenomenal looking. First layer looks flawless, and there doesn't appear to be any color bleed between the black and yellow filament, which is impressive given the color differences between them. Next was the bottom half of the container. Again, an incredible looking print out of some of my favorite Galaxy filament, which seemed appropriate given the project. The last step for this box was adding the latches and hinges with some bolts. And here you have the finished container. Definitely a great start and a first impression for this machine. And also, thankfully, it fits all of my patches really well. Then I decided to jump into a much larger multicolor print project that I've had on my list for a while, a life-size Meowth. Now, I don't entirely remember the conversation that I had with someone that led to this idea, but it happened and I've just been waiting for the right time to execute it, which apparently was now. The majority of this print is split into separate colored pieces, so no waste, which I love. The one exception are the eyes if you want to print them as a single piece. Again, all of these pieces were turning out really great looking, especially with them all being these more unusual organic shapes. You know, it's not just your standard cube or sphere. A lot of them also had quite intense overhangs that, for the most part, printed really cleanly. I mean, these whiskers, I didn't even realize how steep the overhang was on these. I just knew that apparently it was going to be successful without support, and you can see the underneath how clean it is. I was just continuing to make my way through all of the various pieces. Thankfully, Meowth wasn't too hard to color match. That's the one thing when you're looking at multicolor printing that can start to get really challenging if you just can't find the color that you're looking for in filament form. All that was left to do once I had everything printed was assembling all of the parts together. Just used some good old super glue for this. Some of the parts had added dowels to line up the pieces appropriately, but the majority of them just sort of go into place. And this was so cool to see it finally coming together. It is also the one project that has really solidified that it's probably a very good thing that 3D printing did not exist when I was younger, because there wouldn't have been anything stopping me from making my way through the entire Pokédex in print form. This Meowth is easily in my top 10 3D prints I've ever done. He looks like he came straight out of the anime, and I'm going to need to reel my self-control in to not go overboard with all of the life-size Pokemon prints I now want to make. But seriously, the printed pieces that he's compiled of all look really great. The head and body are what had the extreme overhangs, so those areas look a little rough, but I'd say they're very in line with what I'd expect given the shape of those parts. The pieces all went together really well as well, so great dimensional accuracy on them. After that, I wanted to work on a more three-dimensional multicolor print so that we can really see how the Q2 handles the color changes and the print quality that comes along with that. So I went with this knitted pumpkin snail. I just really love the character design of this little guy. Figured he'd make a good fall decoration. I do just have to say though, I slightly messed up the settings with this one. I was trying to conserve filament and lowered the flushing ratio too much apparently. I also didn't adjust the value between the black and the orange like I did for the black and the white, and wouldn't you know it, the printer decided to go between the black and the orange all of the time, creating this unfortunate dark band on the pumpkin. So if you can look past the user error there, this snail print turned out really great looking. All of the details are really clean. Had I not been left to my own devices with the slicer, then it probably would have been a perfect print. Next, I wanted to jump into using some more advanced filaments with my personal favorite, ABS. At this time, I was working on adding to and improving my Chewbacca by building him his bowcaster. I had a couple of build plates worth of pieces that the Q2 helped produce and did a fantastic job doing so. I apparently was on a creature kick this week because next I decided I needed a life-size Rhoda the Hutt in my life. He was a little long for the printer, so I split a bit of his tail off to print separately, and he turned out fantastic looking as well out of this green ABS that I was trying to use up. Just look at all of that fantastic wrinkle definition. But anyway, the arms also printed really well. ABS is like the polar opposite of a stringy filament, so I'm not surprised there's not any strings between the fingers, but it's nice to see they all printed really clean too. And here's what Rhoda looks like temporarily put together, because at some point I will be finishing and painting him up. After that, I wanted to try out some more engineering types of filament on the Q2, starting with PLA-CF. And this is where things unfortunately started to go wrong. It would just not load into the hot end. CF filaments are always a lot stiffer. They don't really like bending around PTFE tubes, so I went ahead and trimmed the 4 long tubes that run from the box to the hub in hopes that it would simplify and straighten the filament's path, because ultimately I wanted to use this PLA-CF with a separate support filament, so I did need to be using it in the QIDI box. I was feeling hopeful because the machine was finally able to load the filament into the hot end, but then it wasn't able to pull it out to then switch to the support filament. I tried taking the glass off to see if it was the bend in the tube above the hot end that was causing the issue, but nothing was working until I started to take parts of the PTFE tube path apart and discovered that it seemed to come into a lot of resistance around this coupler. Now, until this point, this obviously hadn't been an issue with all of the color changes this printer had been doing, but in the name of science, I decided to remove the coupler and switch to a longer single tube running from the hub directly to the hot end. And you know what? It worked. You'd never have known that I'd just spent multiple days trying to figure out a solution to get this printer and the box to like carbon fiber filament. At some point during that time, I tried using the external spool holder with the PLA-CF just to get it printing, and that worked fine without issue. So it seems that it was just a combination of the CF filament, QIDI box, and that coupler that didn't like each other. To see if this modification was really working, I decided to up the stakes by attempting to use some of this PAHT-CF I had left over. This again had no issue printing through the box now, and this stuff is crazy stiff. The Q2 also did a beautiful job handling this filament. And this is just a bracket for my SCADAS board that will hold my power tool battery charger. Did not need to be printed out of this fancy of a filament, but it did turn out really cool looking. It's been a slight mixed bag of a couple of weeks, but as always, I wanted to wrap this video up by giving you all my pros, cons, and final thoughts on the QIDI Q2. The first pro, and I would argue most important metric for any 3D printer, is that it produces beautiful prints. The vast majority had no visible VFAs, whether that's due to the wider belts or just really good vibration compensation. Really the only one where you could start to see a little bit of something was on Meowth's gold coin, probably due to the fact that it was printed in silk PLA, which is notorious for having those visible artifacts. For silk filament though, it's honestly pretty minimal, and I would say that possibly with a few settings tweaks, it could maybe be completely eliminated. I did use majority default settings throughout this video. The only things I ever really modified were filament temperatures to better suit whichever type and brand of filament that I was using. I did also eventually slightly modify some of the speed settings just because, especially on Meowth, there were some extreme overhangs and I was trying to get the quality of those to be as best as they possibly could given just the nature and shape of the prints. But for the most part, the default printer profiles and settings for this machine were working well for me. I never had to do any extreme testing or calibrating of any filaments to get really impressive looking prints. The filament change time is also lower than what I have found the time tends to be for this style of machine. It took 1 minute and 30 seconds to go from black to white filament, which should be the longest possible time for a filament transition. 1 minute and 40 is about the average that I've typically seen, so a possible 10 seconds between hundreds of filament changes will add up really fast in time savings. But in general, the multicolor prints on the Q2 all looked fantastic as well. Setup for the machine is super quick and easy, even with filming, which generally takes me longer. I think it only took me like 20 minutes if I was just setting this up myself. 10 to 15 maybe. As with pretty much all enclosed machines, the majority of your setup time is spent taking packaging and extra screws and stuff out of the printer and not actually assembling anything. I do overall really like the design of the Q2. It aesthetically matches the Plus 4, so if that was also a printer you had in your collection, they would look really good working side by side if that was something you were concerned about. The top sliding glass mechanism or feature is also a very interesting solution, although I never ended up personally using it. When printing with PLA or any material that just doesn't need the chamber to be heated, opening the front door has been working perfectly fine for me, but I can still appreciate the sliding glass feature because having to remove the top glass depending on what you're printing, it just becomes a headache. The one printer design element that I did want to note is the handle is quite small and also pretty shallow, so I could see it being awkward for larger hands to grab onto. It is just attached with a couple of bolts though, so if you weren't a fan of it, it should be something that you could print a replacement for or swap it out with something larger. It is also nice to see this printer having a slightly larger build volume than the typical like 250 cube. I would have liked it even more if it was a 270 cube or going even taller for the height, but with the 270mm square bed, it does of course give you a little extra space to fit larger prints, or if you were into multicolor batch printing, more space to put even more of the same piece on to save yourself on filament waste. You know, that's something I always like to touch on in these videos is the slicer and software side of things. QIDI Studio is based on Orca Slicer, which I'm sure by now you all are aware I'm a big fan of, and they didn't do anything particularly weird to it to then make it buggy, so I'm an even bigger fan of that. Throughout this video, I sent all of my print files to the printer via Wi-Fi, but you can always put them on a USB stick and transfer them that way. Because another massive bonus for this machine is that it can be used completely offline. In fact, it actually comes with an Ethernet port, which seems to be a continued rarity for 3D printers these days. It uses clippers, so you have a little more control and modification ability with that. It also means you can access the printer via its IP address on your phone browser, say, and control it that way, and also view the live feed of the camera to make sure that your print is going okay. The one thing with the Q2 is right now the firmware is a little glitchy, but I believe I'm still on a beta version of the software, so I'm sure all of those bugs will get worked out. Everything I've noticed is more cosmetic though and hasn't been affecting any of the features of the machine. Like I had a 3-hour print tell me it took like 68 days or something crazy to complete. Just weird little glitchy things like that. And all of that brings us to the one con and biggest problem that I had with this machine, and that was the QIDI box. You saw how it was working perfectly fine throughout this video with all of the PLA that I was using, both for the multicolor prints and any of the single colors. I was just running everything through the QIDI box, including the ABS, and I had everything running through it without issue until I got to the engineering filaments. And when it went wrong, it wasn't super easy to fix. Because there's no release mechanism around where the filament enters the box. One, it means that anytime you want to actually unload a spool from the box, you have to use the printer to send the command to the box to unload it for you. And while I liked the initial design of the box with its very sleek look and not having all of these additional buttons around where the filament enters the machine, machine. It did get increasingly annoying over time to not be able to just hold down a button and take the filament out yourself. And that also means when the printer is incapable of pulling the filament out on its own, it doesn't leave you with many safe feeling options for you to do it manually. I ended up turning everything off and then manually trying to move the gear that's in front of the filament spool while also yanking the filament out of the slot to try and get something to move and release. But it did not feel like a step I should have been attempting or even mentioning on camera for you to attempt yourself. And that's why I initially started to take apart the various sections of the PTFE tube to try and figure out where it was coming into all of the resistance that meant the box couldn't start just pulling the filament out on its own. And it was around that back coupler that seemed to be causing the issue, at least on mine, because I did attempt to look online to see if anyone had mentioned this problem or experienced it themselves, and I couldn't find anything. So I guess I just have the cursed coupler, because after removing it, everything went to working perfectly fine, exactly how it always should have been. And that was also without using the riser that I printed, which I have no clue if that's even come up in the video yet, because yes, I did print a riser for the glass to see if it was the bend in the PTFE tube that was causing the issue, like right where it goes into the hot end, and that didn't end up solving anything for me either. Glad I was able to solve that. Obviously, it would have been nice had I not had to deal with any of it to begin with, but it doesn't seem to be a very common issue, like, at all for anyone else, apparently. And it was also only an issue for those stiffer engineering filaments, because up until I tried using those, everything was working fine. I did have the PLA CF running fine from the external spool holder, and that was still running through the cursed coupler without issue, so the coupler and the box for me just was not the vibe. I did also find out a couple of days ago that I technically have a test unit of the QIDI box, and there have been optimized modifications made to the final unit, so I'm not sure what changes there might be between them and if the final units wouldn't have experienced the same issue that I did with it not being able to pull out those stiffer filaments from the hot end, but I just thought it was worth mentioning. The majority of the time I was having a really positive experience with the Q2. It was really only until that last group of prints that I was trying with the carbon fiber filaments where the issues started to arise, and even then it does seem to be a very one-off issue and more the QIDI box's fault rather than the printer itself. If you're someone who's been looking into getting a 3D printer that can handle a ton of different materials, then the QIDI Q2 is definitely a promising option. It's an extremely reasonably priced printer for the specs and material capabilities that it has. I have no complaints about the print quality. Everything was looking great, from PLA to ABS to the carbon fiber PLA and PAHT. I found it to be a very easy and reliable 3D printer to use. All of the prints I was using it for were turning out successful. I would say it's also reasonably beginner friendly. The default setting profiles could use some tuning for the most optimal results, but that is something you can learn yourself to modify and also can be added and improved upon in the future. If you'd like to find out even more information about the QIDI Q2, there will be links in the description box. But that is everything, so thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.